Emily sat in the living room, lost and in disbelief after her daughter's funeral. Alex was dismantling the mourning hall with disdain.
Ugh. What bad luck!
Emily rushed over to stop him, but Alex pushed her to the ground, scraping her hands. John and Mary watched coldly, not saying a word in her defense.
Emily, you're still young. Without the burden of a child, you can find another family to marry into.
Chloe just passed away, and you're already talking about this?
You're a widow without a child. If you don't remarry, do you plan to stay here forever?
Tears streamed down Emily's face uncontrollably.
I paid for this house. Why can't I live here?
John stormed over and slapped her hard. Mary quickly stepped aside.
I raised you for 18 years and spent a lot of money. Building this house was your duty. How dare you claim it as yours, you shameless girl?
Emily pointed to her disabled left leg.
What money did you spend on me? All your money went to Alex. I wore hand-me-downs and even paid my school fees by working in the fields. You broke my leg and refused to pay for treatment, leaving me permanently disabled.
When John came at her again, Emily raised her phone in panic.
Come any closer, and I'll call the police. They will definitely handle domestic violence.
Alex quickly pulled John away. John glared at Emily with hatred as he walked off, cursing under his breath. Mary poked Emily's head and scolded her.
You ungrateful wretch! Calling the police on your own father.
Alex snatched the phone from Emily's hand.
Emily, Mom and Dad are getting old. Do you really want to make this home a living hell?
He never called her sister, always addressing her by her name, which symbolized her unwelcome presence in the family. Her birth had deeply disappointed her parents because she was a girl, and Mary had suffered severe complications during childbirth, making future pregnancies unlikely. The tension in the room was palpable as Alex confronted Emily once again.
Emily, Mom and Dad are getting old. Do you really want to make this home a living hell?
He never called her sister, always addressing her by her name. Even her name was a symbol of her unwelcome presence in this family.
If I give you the house, will we be even?
What do you mean, even? This house is mine. Mom and Dad worked hard to raise you, and now you want to abandon them? Are you even human?
A daughter is raised for someone else's family.
Emily couldn't understand why they were so greedy and biased. Everything valuable in the house was bought with the money she earned from working. Her dowry had been squandered by John, and she had paid for Alex's vocational school fees. She didn't expect much from them, just a peaceful and harmonious family life. But they never acknowledged her contributions. She was just a tool to be discarded when no longer useful. Thinking of George, her heart ached. He was one of the few people who showed her warmth, and now she couldn't even keep him and their only child safe. All her savings had gone into this house.
Dad, Mom, I have records of all the money spent on building this house, from buying materials to paying the workers. If you insist on kicking me out, we'll have to take this to the village and town authorities.
You ungrateful girl, how can you be so calculative with your own parents?
In this household, Mary only dared to scold Emily. She was a coward in front of John and Alex. Seeing Emily's firm stance, Alex softened his tone.
Sis, let's not make a big deal out of this. I'll give you the best room in the East Wing. Let's not talk about money anymore.
It was rare for him to call her sis, and her heart softened a bit.
I finally found a wife. You don't want to ruin this marriage, do you? I'm the only male heir of the family.
Alex had been spoiled by the family, lazy and unable to hold a proper job. It wasn't easy for him to find a girl willing to marry him. If this marriage fell through because of the house, they would hate her forever.
As long as they acknowledge my contributions and give me a place in this family, it would be enough. Adding a new member to the family was always a joyous occasion. Maybe things would change for the better.
2 months later, her sister-in-law, Chloe, moved in. She was not easy to deal with. Within a week, she started arguing with their parents.
I can't stand my current room. I prefer Emily's.
To keep the peace, Emily gave Chloe her room and moved to a small room in the West Wing. But Chloe was still not satisfied, constantly making indirect accusations.
A married daughter is like spilled water and shouldn't stay in her parents' home, even if she has lost her husband. Emily is a jinx, bringing bad luck to the family.
Mary, probably afraid Emily would bring up the money issue again, knelt before her, startling Emily into helping her up, but she refused to rise.
Daughter, please, I'm begging you. Can you stay somewhere else for a while? Chloe said she won't have children as long as you're here. What should we do? We can't let the family line end.
Mom, please get up first.
Mary knelt on the ground, beating her chest and crying.
I won't get up. Emily, please agree for your mother's sake. If you don't, I'll stay kneeling.
Seeing Emily still holding firm, John came over, pulling at Mary and cursing at Emily.
How selfish can you be, making your elders kneel? Watch out for retribution.
The house was in chaos, with neighbors gathering to watch the spectacle. Emily tearfully helped her mother up.
Fine, I'll go.
She reluctantly rented a place in town and moved her belongings there on her electric scooter. Alone in the unfamiliar house, loneliness overwhelmed her. She missed George and her daughter, Chloe.
I never imagined that an arranged marriage with an older, unattractive man like George would genuinely touch my heart. Perhaps it was because I had lacked love all my life and craved it desperately.
She leaned out the window for some fresh air and saw a familiar figure.
How could she be here? Had she returned after all these years?
Aunt Jessica! I called out to her. She turned around, surprised to see me. At 40-something, her hair was mostly gray, her skin loose, and her eyes dull, indicating she hadn't had an easy life. I pulled her into my rented room and poured her a cup of tea.
How's Mike? She asked, referring to my brother, her biological son.
He's doing well. The family built a new house, and he recently got married. They might have a child soon, I said, feeling a pang in my heart.
Jessica's sallow face showed a faint smile.
That's good, that's good.
I should hate her, I've suffered so much because of her son. But I can't bring myself to hate this unfortunate woman. Back then, facing John's abuse, Mary never thought of leaving. She always blamed herself for not bearing a son. Desperate to give John a son, she targeted Jessica, who saw her as a good sister and was naive and without support.
One snowy night, I hid behind a cabinet, terrified, as John and Mary dragged Jessica into a room. At first, I could hear her heart-wrenching cries, but then her mouth was probably gagged, and only muffled sounds came out. Mary came out alone, locked the door, and stood there, hands clasped, muttering something.
From that day, Jessica stayed with us. She resisted and tried to escape, but after being beaten by John and coaxed by Mary, she gradually became numb and stopped trying to run away. Her belly grew day by day, and Mary told me it was my brother inside. They told everyone that Jessica had been abandoned and that our family kindly took her in and would adopt her child.
When Alex was born, John and Mary were overjoyed, throwing a big party and inviting the whole village. Mary said she finally felt proud, but I didn't understand, Alex wasn't even her child. Mary treated Alex very well, giving him everything. My already low status in the family plummeted further after his birth. John, Mary, and Alex seemed like a real family, while Jessica and I were just burdens in their eyes. At night, I often saw John going to Jessica's room. During those times, Mary would take out her anger on me, either hitting or scolding me, though her words weren't really meant for me. As Alex grew, Mary became increasingly intolerant of Jessica.
Emily, Aunt Jessica will take you away. This house is no place for anyone, she said. At 8, I had no concept of family environment. My parents said every family was like this, so I thought mine was normal. I believed Jessica was a troublemaker trying to kidnap me, so I told John and Mary. I thought they would beat her, and I felt a bit guilty, but instead, they handed me a bundle.
We don't have the money to support so many people. Your Aunt Jessica is going to the city, and you're going with her, they said. Realizing they were abandoning me, I collapsed, crying.
It's all your fault. All your fault. I blamed Jessica for everything, pushing and hitting her. She didn't fight back, letting me vent. She was like a soulless puppet, her expression stiff and distant. After my desperate pleas, my parents finally kept me, on the condition that I work more, take care of Alex, and obey them in everything. I gladly agreed.
Jessica left. For the first few years, she would sneak back to see Alex, but then she disappeared. My parents said she went to the city for a better life. Emily recalled her Aunt Jessica and felt a bit apologetic towards her.
Aunt Jessica, how have you been all these years?
Just getting by. Why are you here alone? Where are your parents, your husband, and your child?
My husband and daughter have both passed away. My sister-in-law dislikes me, so I moved out of my parents' house.
Jessica's eyes showed a hint of pity.
You've had a tough life. Your family wasn't reliable, and now your marriage, sigh.
They exchanged a few more words, mostly about Emily's brother.
Aunt Jessica, is there something on your mind?
Could you let me stay for a few days? I'll move out once I find a job that provides food and accommodation.
Emily, feeling lonely, agreed to let her stay. That evening, Emily saw a post from Alex on social media. He, her sister-in-law, and her parents had prepared a lavish dinner.
Were they celebrating my departure from the house? Perhaps they were trying to please Lisa, hoping she would have children to carry on the family line.
As long as Mike is doing well, I'm at ease.
Her words pierced Emily's heart. Despite everything Emily did for the family, she never received a shred of warmth from them.
My kind and simple husband and my adorable daughter had both left me. Was I truly an unlucky person?
At Mr. Williams' 60th birthday banquet, Emily sat at the same table as her sister-in-law, Lisa.
Lisa, I have no grudge against you. Since you joined the family, have I ever treated you poorly? You used your pregnancy to force me out, and I complied. What more do you want?
You're the one who insisted on staying at your parents' house. When did I ever force you out? Don't accuse me falsely.
Emily was stunned for a moment, confused by Lisa's denial. Emily stood in the dimly lit room, her heart heavy with her brother's harsh words.
Emily! Mom and Dad are getting old. Do you really want to make this home a living hell?
He never called her sister, always using her name, a symbol of her unwelcome presence. Her birth had been a disappointment because she was a girl, and Mary's complications during childbirth made future pregnancies unlikely. They saw her as a bad omen.
The name Hannah doesn't seem appropriate. Let's change it to Emily.
She wouldn't have known this if John and Mary hadn't used it frequently to humiliate her. Their poor rural family had a history of poverty, and John was a heavy drinker and gambler.
Emily, why can't you just listen for once?
He often beat Mary and Emily over trivial matters. Mary, never blaming John, took out her frustration on Emily.
It's your fault for not being a boy.
Since Mary couldn't have more children, they did something outrageous when Emily was 5, which led to the birth of Alex. Emily stood silently, her heart heavy with the weight of her family's actions. John, her father, was the first to break the silence.
Emily, Mom and Dad are getting old. Do you really want to make this home a living hell?
He never called her sister, always addressing her by her name. Even her name was a symbol of her unwelcome presence in this family.
Why do you always blame me for everything?
Emily's birth had deeply disappointed her parents because she was a girl, and Mary had suffered severe complications during childbirth, making future pregnancies unlikely.
You should have been a boy. You've brought nothing but shame to this family.
When it was time to register Emily's name, they casually chose Hannah, but Officer Smith found it inappropriate and changed it to Emily. She wouldn't have known this if John and Mary hadn't frequently used it to humiliate her.
We were a poor rural family with 3 generations of poverty behind us. Do you understand what that means, Emily?
I understand, but it's not my fault.
John was a heavy drinker and gambler, and their home was always in dire straits. From as far back as Emily could remember, John often beat Mary and her over trivial matters.
It's all your fault. If you were a boy, none of this would have happened.
Mary never blamed John. Instead, she took out her frustrations on Emily, blaming her for not being a boy and causing her to lose face in the family.
Since Mary couldn't have more children, they did something outrageous when Emily was 5, which led to the birth of Alex.
Emily stood in the dimly lit kitchen, her brother John glaring at her with disdain.
Emily, Mom and Dad are getting old. Do you really want to make this home a living hell?
He never called her sister, always addressing her by her name, a constant reminder of her unwelcome presence. Emily remembered how her birth had disappointed their parents, John and Mary, who had wanted a son. Mary's complications during childbirth had made future pregnancies unlikely, further deepening their resentment towards Emily.
I never asked to be born, John. Why do you always blame me for everything?
Because you are the reason Mom and Dad are so miserable. They never wanted a girl.
When it was time to register her name, they had casually chosen Hannah, but Officer Smith had changed it to Emily. She wouldn't have known this if John and Mary hadn't frequently used it to humiliate her.
You ungrateful child. Look at what you've done to this family.
John was a heavy drinker and gambler, and their home was always in dire straits. Emily could recall countless times when John had beaten both Mary and herself over trivial matters. Mary never blamed John. Instead, she took out her frustrations on Emily, blaming her for not being a boy and for causing her to lose face in the family.
If only you were a boy, things would have been different.
I know, Mom. You remind me every day.
Since Mary couldn't have more children, They did something outrageous when Emily was 5, which led to the birth of Alex.
David and Emily have known each other for a long time and have met many times. Yesterday, when I came back, I saw them together. To avoid disturbing them, I stayed at the factory for the night, she explained to the police.
I glared at her angrily. Living under the same roof, I suspected she played a significant role in this incident.
My phone, my bank card passwords, the house keys. It was both sad and laughable.
Those who are pitiful must have something detestable, I muttered under my breath.
After leaving the police station, a group of people surrounded me again, urging me to marry David.
You're a widow with a child, not some young maiden. Since things have already happened, you might as well settle down with him.
Forget about it. Don't come looking for me again. Next month, I'm leaving to work in another city.
I decided to leave, to escape far away. I had no other choice. I couldn't fight them, but I could avoid them.
You can continue renting here. I'm leaving, I told Jessica.
Sorry, she muttered quietly, looking embarrassed.
This was my hometown, but I had no attachment to it anymore. I needed to leave and never return if possible. But as I packed my things, I suddenly realized I couldn't find Chloe's favorite doll.
Where did you put my things? I asked impatiently.
What are you rummaging for?
Have you seen the doll Chloe used to hold?
Mary and Lisa exchanged glances and whispered something to John. He looked at me sinisterly.
We put it away for you.
Mary and Lisa's expressions turned strange at his words.
Give it back.
Marry David, and I'll return the doll to you.
John knew how much I loved my daughter and used her belongings to threaten me.
Do you have any conscience? That's Chloe's keepsake.
We don't care. If you don't comply, forget about getting it back.
I trembled with anger, searching everywhere until they drove me out. I wandered to the pond where Chloe had drowned, staring at the calm water, imagining her innocent face.
That's Chloe's doll, I exclaimed, spotting a little girl holding it. How did it end up in this child's hands?
John confronted Emily, his voice filled with frustration.
Emily! Mom and Dad are getting old. Do you really want to make this home a living hell?
He never called her sister, always addressing her by her name. Even her name symbolized her unwelcome presence in the family.
You never wanted me here, did you? My birth has always been a disappointment.
Her birth had deeply disappointed their parents because she was a girl, and Mary had suffered severe complications during childbirth, making future pregnancies unlikely. They saw her as a bad omen and treated her with disdain. The tension in the room was palpable as Emily faced her brother, John.
Emily! Mom and Dad are getting old. Do you really want to make this home a living hell?
He never called her sister, always addressing her by name, a constant reminder of her unwelcome presence in the family. Emily's birth had deeply disappointed their parents, and Mary had suffered severe complications during childbirth, making future pregnancies unlikely.
You're the reason for all our misfortunes, Emily. If you were a boy, things would be different.
Their family was poor, with 3 generations of poverty behind them. John was a heavy drinker and gambler, and their home was always in turmoil. From as far back as Emily could remember, John often beat Mary and her over trivial matters. Mary never blamed him. Instead, she took out her frustrations on Emily.
Why must I always be the scapegoat? Why couldn't I have been born into a loving family?
Since Mary couldn't have more children, they did something outrageous when Emily was 5, which led to the birth of Alex.